So how you feeling? Feeling good? You feeling pumped?
Yep.
You ready for this?
Yep.
We're gonna fight.
The battle of the interpretations.
All right, let's go. Hi everyone, and welcome to Deadhouse with one word, because today we're starting the book club, which is going to start with the first book, Welcome to Deadhouse. 2 words.
That's not confusing at all.
No, not at all.
No.
This is Jennifer, and we are ready to go today, hey?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We wanted to start the book club with a little bit of an explanation for starting this in July, because the very first book was published in July of 1992, and also the first book happens to be set in July. So, yeah.
Yeah.
We had some small thoughts into it, at least. July was the date we were aiming for, and we're happy to say we made it for them because it really came together.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've read this book, we're going to start with a little bit on the description, just some of the basics. Of course, it's by R.L. Stine, and it was published by Scholastic Inc., and it's under their Apple paperback imprint, and which is also done by Parachute Press. And our main characters were Amanda Benson, who is 12,
Mm-hmm.
Josh Benson, who is 11, and it's told from Amanda's point of view.
Yep.
And do you want to say where we start out in this story?
Well, the family, they're willed a house by Uncle Charles, God rest his soul, whoever he may be, because apparently he's fictional.
Yeah, well, the dad didn't even know. He didn't know.
No.
He didn't know he had an Uncle Charles. We'll get into that more later.
They got a house from him, so he's good in his books.
He's happy. He's excited.
Yeah, so the house is actually in Dark Falls?
Dark Falls.
Dark Falls. And all the houses have the same look. They're all dark and shady with heavily treed lots. And
They were very Victorian era
Mhm.
houses, so the whole neighborhood is a very old neighborhood that was not heavily renovated.
right.
So this is all like, 100-odd-year-old housing, we'll say.
Mm-hmm. A real estate agent, or is it the...
Real estate agent.
Okay, I wasn't sure if he was a real estate agent or if he was kind of like the executor of the will, Mr. Dawes, who shows them the house. Does it kind of specify?
I don't think it does. I kind of felt like he worked for a real estate company, but maybe it was a lawyer.
Well, this is
I'm
where we
not
get some
really
feedback.
sure. You know what? I all of a sudden don't remember. You keep going, and I'm going to look up if he was a lawyer or if he was a real estate agent.
And I wasn't sure if I missed it reading it through, but they could have just been shady about it just because who he is and how he's involved in this area. He is also the one who shows all the new families the house, which is the popular house that everybody moves into, apparently.
Yeah, it's a super popular house as I continue to try to look up his profession, because believe it or not, we actually were well prepared. For some reason, I felt like he was a real estate agent, but it would make more sense if he was a lawyer. Not necessarily the executor, but at least a lawyer for the will that would be showing them the property and have the keys and everything. Mr. Compton Dawes, with his lovely blonde hair and blue eyes, starts showing them around their house.
Yes.
And it's at this point, we'll say, Amanda thinks she sees a child in the house.
The first of many.
She thinks she sees a little boy. And it's interesting because this story sets you up really early on with a lot of false starts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a common writing tactic, I guess we'll say, especially in horror, for like jump scares or false starts to what you think the mystery is going to be. She thinks she maybe sees a child. She's not sure. She goes outside and she can't find her brother and the dog. Oh my God, where did they go? And, like, they were just down the street. Now, they did have to go looking for them, and there was a bit of a production, but...
Well, the dog was having none of this place.
No, and he got curious in the graveyard. And started checking out the graveyard.
Yeah, I think he was onto the story from the very beginning. That poor dog.
And that's another trope, too. Is that animals always sense evil / spirits / the supernatural. And this dog was no exception.
And they actually even made point of saying that in the novel itself.
Yeah,
they said
dogs are always the first to notice.
No, they're first to go. They're the first to die.
Yeah, they said dogs are always the first to notice, which is why they're the first to go, because they have to kill the animals, because they're going to tip off the people.
Which I think Josh and Amanda were already tipped off of the dog acting completely out of character from...
They were, but they kept trying to ignore it. Because, like, their parents were saying, oh, it's just a new place and that's why he's acting strange. Yeah. And Amanda was already seeing a lot of strange things and having strange experiences, and it was starting to kind of sound crazy to her parents, and she's sort of known as the older, more mature, responsible child. So she was trying to, like, say, oh, there's a logical explanation for everything.
Yeah. I don't know if I buy that. When my dog's wigging out, there's usually a very valid reason. It's not like Jen's imagining things. It's usually something that's a little more...
Although, to be fair, I did know a dog that, even though it sounded nothing like the doorbell, if you said bing bong, it would run to the door, barking, checking for a person.
I need this dog in my life.
That is not a joke.
But that made me sad. Like, I don't like animals in any kind of fiction kind of being the first.
I kind of hate the animals getting killed anyway. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't like it when the dog dies.
Yeah.
I don't understand. There's a few things we don't understand about the plot. So let's go over the basics of the plot first.
Okay.
Just so we sort of get into this properly. The idea is that this is the Deadhouse.
Right.
And everyone there is dead and used to live in that house.
That's how they came into Dark Falls.
Right. That is the house that they show the new people to. Because the people are alive and they die in that house or become dead in that house, which is why it's the Deadhouse.
Or in the amphitheater. They're lured to this town through that house.
Yes. The people will start to, if they're either a bit, supernatural sensitive, they'll have premonitions. Like I said, their pets will go crazy. And they need, they're ghouls and they need new lifeblood every year at least. Yeah.
Which is the lore of the town.
Yes.
These people survive based on new people moving in and joining them, kind of like a one of us scenario. And they drain the life force to kind of keep the town.
And one of the things I kind of enjoyed about the lore of the town, at least, was the way Amanda's constantly saying, oh, there's a logical explanation for everything. I liked that they weren't just blanket supernatural ghouls. I liked that there was actually a plausible real-life explanation for it. A chemical plant exploded and caused a gas to settle over the town, and everybody died from the gas and came back as ghouls. Which, I mean, I like that a lot better than just it's monsters that all happen to live in an area. I know it's still, like, kind of convenient. Yeah. But it was nice
have no backstory.
To give it... It's nice with the sensible attitude the book keeps trying to take about everything that's happening, that it gave it a more plausible reality for the backstory. So who are some of our other main characters we get introduced to besides Mr. Compton?
Well, it's the 4 kids. There's Ray Thornston.
Ray Thurston.
Yeah. Jerry Franklin, Karen Somerset, and Billy Gregory.
Yeah, and the 2 we see the most are Ray Thurston and Karen Somerset. And they both form really strong bonds with Amanda and Josh. So they get a little bit of a weird vibe from the other kids, and at a couple of different times, especially when they were left alone before the baseball game, Amanda feels very threatened by the children.
Yeah, like that whole circling thing, like feeling just the group of kids coming closer and closer until Mr. Dawes came and kind of broke it up. And it almost like, it didn't feel like it actually happened because it happened, like it dissolved so quickly. That kind of put me on edge.
It's funny that Mr. Compton Dawes, I don't know, I keep calling him Mr. Compton Dawes, but like, it's just Mr. Dawes. Anyways, it was kind of funny how they sort of like tried to throw you off the scent of it with him and make you forget about the fact that the dog reacted to him when he first showed up. Like, I didn't forget that, but as a kid reading it, I probably might have like not, tossed that item aside. The only reason he got involved was because I think he saw them circling. And he was afraid they were going to tip off the kids and the kids were going to be able to run away because it was still daytime. Yeah. And now it was heavy overcast.
And if the kids went missing earlier in the day, as when like this was actually happening,
the parents would worry. And
they wouldn't go to that party, and there goes the setup, and there goes the amphitheater, and they might as well just get into the family moving in because everything's gone to the dogs.
Yeah, and they're actually there for over a month, I think.
It wasn't much longer than that if it was that.
Yeah, I mean, it was at least like 2 to 3 weeks, we'll say, they were there. Because they had time to like unpack and start to get settled. And, they were talking about going out a lot and trying to find ways to pass time until school started, and it wouldn't be too much longer before school started. Kids start to have premonitions as well, so we should probably talk about that aspect. I think because there were so many ghostly figures hanging around the house that the kids were sort of like getting ideas about what was going to happen to them, and it might even have just been caught up in the history of the house itself because so many of the same type of deaths happened at that house. But Amanda has a dream about them sitting around the dinner table, and they're eating, and she can't get up, and she can't really say anything. And her friend is at the door screaming for her to come back to her, and she can't go to the door, and she wants to sing out to her but can't. And then all of a sudden, the flesh starts dripping from her face, and she realizes everything they've been eating was human flesh. And this is a very weird, disturbing dream. Her brother has had dreams of 2 slightly older boys bullying him around the house, as if they lived in the house with him.
Yeah.
Which isn't as weird, but it's kind of weird because Amanda's been hearing the sounds of what sounds like a boy, laughing and snickering and stuff like that at night.
See, I wasn't sure if the premonition that Josh had was some of the boys that were already in the town, because Amanda was seeing and hearing voices. She placed Ray as being the boy that she's seen in the house. So maybe Josh seen some of the other kids. That's kind of the route I was taking. I didn't know if it was a future thing.
And this is what I wondered about as well, because Amanda's was definitely a future premonition. So by the time we got to the very end of the story, I assumed that Josh's was a future premonition as well.
Okay.
And that he was doing the premonition that he had already passed, and he was a ghostly figure in the house.
Kind of like Ray
for the 2 new boys that come at the end, the 2 new slightly older boys, right? Yeah, she's seeing Ray around the house. I think he's the kid that the 2 boys are seeing around the house when he's dreaming. That there are these 2 boys picking on him and moving his stuff around, but maybe it's because they're in his house.
Yeah, so the dream that Amanda had was the second tip-off that something was kind of weird, because both Ray and Karen both said that they used to live in that house. And Amanda
had totally different last names.
Yeah, and Amanda...
Nobody really thought about it too hard, but she did. She kept thinking about it. She did. She kept going, did you say you used to live in her house?
What? But that was definitely the second tip-off, was the premonition of the table.
Was there any other major things they made use of here? They made use of a lot of false start / jump starts where stuff would go missing or go wrong and it would turn out to be nothing. They did that quite a few times. Except for when the dog actually did turn out to be dead. I don't know why they didn't get it the minute they noticed he stunk.
Yeah.
Like, if
Kids.
something smells like a dead animal,
And it's ignoring you and acting weird, then you know something's up.
it's probably a dead animal.
If it smells like a dead animal and it's running around like a dead animal, it's probably a dead animal.
Right?
What speaking of Petey running around the graveyard, for the amount that he was able to run around before he died, because he was doing that when they first moved in, and to the amount that he was running around after he was dead, they were trying to catch him, I was being brought to the idea that this graveyard had a bit of yardage. Like, it wasn't this tiny graveyard.
No, this was like a big thing
But
from the
then-
sounds of it.
Right, but why did all the graves kind of line up relatively close? Like, you might have had one or two in between the names, like, but they were still kind of a condensed area. Did you notice that?
Yeah, it was like half of the graveyard was a graveyard and the other half was the amphitheater. And it kind of feels like the amphitheater is one of those like old historic ruins that just happen to be very close to where they started the graveyard, and so they kind of got folded into one area of property, but it was still kind of strange.
Like, all of the kids are, like, in a line or, like, close to each other,
Yeah.
which was...
But we never saw, other than Mr. Dawes, we never saw any of the parents' graves.
No, so did, like, the kids get knocked off and the parents are like, peace out, we're not staying here? What, would
No,
that
but
be
the
enough?
parents got knocked off as well.
They
And
didn't
we
have
know
to.
they did because we heard about parents from the town. They got invited to a party by grown-ups who were throwing a party.
Yeah, and
So-
they had to be home for a lunch when the sun came out.
Yeah, when the overcast went away and the sun
Yeah.
came out, they had to go for an early lunch.
So why weren't there any graves of the parents, especially
I'm
close to
wondering
kids?
if the graves for the parents weren't in the backyards of the other houses.
Yeah, because I never really got into any of that.
And nobody ever went to anybody's house, ever.
No, except for the Deadhouse. Everybody went to the Deadhouse.
But the houses were all there and it looked like nobody lived in them.
Yeah.
And they kept commenting on that. It didn't look like anybody lived there. So, I don't know, I'm wondering if maybe backyards started to become graveyards because it was such a small graveyard and maybe they were like burying children because they take up less space. I don't know. They weren't
Yeah.
burying them with the parents, whatever that was about.
But then why would Mr. Dawes be buried with all these kids
Well, because he was one of the first few people,
that was there?
yeah, to
Okay.
die in the town.
Okay.
And he may have actually... This
Bored
is what
audience.
this is what I'm wondering about Mr. Dawes, because we know all the kids we talked to showed up after that gas accident. I'm wondering if Mr. Dawes didn't die after the gas accident or during the gas accident.
So he was one of the originals.
So he would have been one of the original people that rose from the grave,
Oh, okay.
which is an interesting distinction because they're kind of like zombies, but they're not technically zombies. So I did look this up. And it is meant to be a ghoul, and it's meant to be a ghoul for a number of reasons because of how ghoul was defined here. So I looked it up, and a ghoul was an evil spirit or phantom, especially one supposed to rob graves and feed on dead bodies. Late 18th century, it came into popular use. It's thought to be from an Arabic word, specifically in that it says a desert demon believed to rob graves and devour corpses. So this is a small, like, desert-like town. So that really fits. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it says, some state that a ghoul is also a desert-dwelling, shape-shifting demon that can assume the guise of an animal, especially a hyena. It lures people into the desert wastes or abandoned places to slay and devour them. The creature also preys on young children, drinks blood, steals coins, and eats the dead, then taking the form of the person most recently eaten. So I'm wondering if it was shape-shifting, or if it actually happened the way they said it did with the gas. I'm more inclined to believe that it happened the way they said it did with the gas.
Yeah.
But I also think that, like, the ghoul thing fits because they specifically talked about needing the blood. And this idea of fresh blood.
They need to survive.
But she also had a dream of eating
The flesh.
dead flesh. So I think it kind of fits the ghoul thing really well.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that this has done with ghouls that I hadn't seen done with ghouls before, that's not to say it hasn't been done, is that he plays on the spirit or phantom aspect idea of it rather than the shape-changing part.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you see semi-transparent figures running around, or you don't see them at all, but you hear their voices and they're moving things, because they're there, but like they act ghostly almost in the light.
Haunting or...
Yeah.
Okay.
So he did something different with ghouls that you don't normally see.
Mm-hmm.
But this also brings up my biggest point about the plot here.
Okay.
They all get killed because they're not good around very bright lights, especially sunlight.
Well, the flesh just melts off them.
Right. Even if it's a
Flashlight?
a flashlight is it halogen
I think
that's
it's
meant
halogen.
to emulate sunlight?
Mm-hmm. It's too bright.
So even halogen ones will like make them melt away and perish and
Mm-hmm.
turn to ash. When they knock over this tree that's been sheltering the amphitheater and expose them all to sunlight, supposedly they all disintegrate. So what was with them being around in the daytime kind of ghostly in the house? Is it because the houses were shaded and it never got enough direct light to really bother them, but just enough to make them kind of ghostly?
I think that was it, because they did talk about the large trees in the yard and how everything was really dark. Like the backyard was dark and the leaves were dead and the weeds were dead. Like there's not enough sunlight to keep basic weeds alive. So that gives me the impression that the house is actually shaded as well.
And while it does have in there, like in the history of a ghoul, that they're an evil spirit, it's usually meant evil spirit as in demon,
Mm-hmm.
not as in actual ghostly spirit.
Yeah, this like translucent, and then going invisible. Because like the kids run around the house all the time during the day. So like if they're like tormenting Amanda, and then when the parents came, they were gone. Where'd they go? Like they can't go outside. The sun's out. What happened?
So obviously he used that as a way for them to be able to hide themselves, that they could go invisible and they could act more ghostly and do spirit things, which is, like I said, it's a good workaround for that, and it's an interesting thing you don't normally see in terms of ghoul stories, but at the same time, it just, if the light really does destroy them,
Yeah.
how is Mr. Dawes showing a new house at the end? You didn't get the timeline at first,
No,
right?
I was thinking they needed new blood every year. So once a year, a new family moved in. They were trapped, killed, became one of them, and then the new family moved in. Like it all happened kind of within a year. But the time frame here, like the Benson family, they weren't there a year. They were only there for a short amount of time. And then a new family was moving in as they were hauling out. So what confused me and what didn't play with the lore with my interpretation of it is that everything was happening really fast towards the end. Well, you had a different idea of that, so...
Yeah, so the way I read it as they had to have a new family every year, I looked at it as at least one new family every year. So there could have been more than one family a year. The only thing I don't get is the idea of them moving in before school started is because school was never going to start.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were ghouls.
Were not.
Right.
Yeah.
They were ghouls. They didn't, use electricity because they couldn't use lights. There was no school. They just sort of like hung out as a community of ghouls. So my problem with that is if they were meant to die at the party, well, the parents were, and then the kids the next day, when they went looking for and couldn't find their parents, I'm assuming Mr. Compton would lure them, and then, the other children would do away with them, and there'd be nobody to save them. So the idea is get rid of the parents first, and then the kids, because then there's nobody to go looking or panic or worry about the kids. So that part made sense. But then how are you going to have a new family moving in? Like, basically at the end of August, right before school.
They had moved
Like, that's a
fast.
very tight timeline. That was like, you were going to have to get rid of that family in a couple of days or they were going to catch on.
And the kids were already gone, so you had to figure out a new way to kind of torment them in the house and lure the parents out away from the kids. Like, they had to put a whole new plan in action when this is probably a plan that they've used again
and
and
people
again.
are unpacking and they're busy, and it's why it took a couple weeks before they got, you know, the first set of parents out to a neighborhood block party.
But as, like, the Benson family was on the road pulling out, because you know they
The
did
new
not pack.
vehicles were pulling in because it was the next day.
Yeah.
And they expected by the next day after the party to already have gotten rid of that family.
Yeah, but how do you get rid of the stuff? Because when they moved into the house, there was no mention of other people's stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So where did their, like, they didn't pack their stuff because they were, like, hauling ass.
Oh, they were getting the hell out of Dodge.
So, like, and I would understand the ghouls removing the stuff,
Yeah.
but there was no time for that.
No.
That family was in that next morning, and Mr. Compton was supposedly destroyed. Like, the whole thing at the end there was weird. But I really did like the line where she said, "I used to live in your house."
Mm-hmm.
It's just the rest of that made no sense.
And where did everybody's stuff go? Like, if they're doing a turnaround and they're doing a quick turnaround.
I would assume they just distribute it amongst each other and, like, put it in the houses and it becomes a community thing.
Yeah.
But, because, like, someone laid out clothes for her.
Yeah,
And it wasn't her mother.
I'm pretty sure that was Karen, though.
It was probably Karen. She was like, "Oh, this outfit looks cute.
Yeah.
We're best friends. I'm going to give you an outfit."
Yeah.
Because the two of those really bonded really well. And when she killed her,
Mm-hmm.
or when she died, I should say, as part of the group, I really liked her reaction when she said thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was as if Karen didn't really want to be a ghoul and didn't take to it the same way some of the others did.
Well, she was the only one who was mentioned wearing bright green tights. Everybody else, like, their clothing wasn't described as being bright or cheerful or color saturated, I noticed.
Yeah, everyone else was sort of like generic clothing, but they
Mhm.
took the time to really describe Karen's clothes and how
Yeah.
bright they were. So that was, I think, meant to be a signifier that she was maybe a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Robert was sort of following the crowd because he felt pressured that he had to as the Watcher, and all of this responsibility of them surviving was
Ray?
put on him. Ray,
Yeah.
not Robert. Ray Thurston, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he took that to heart because he was the Watcher, as you said.
Although he did really like those kids and wanted to be friends with them, and he didn't want them to find out too soon and ruin the plans,
Yeah.
because I kind of felt like he also kind of liked them a little, and he didn't really.
So, do you think that plays on his innocence as, like, a 12-year-old boy just wanting to make friends and learn?
Yeah,
from
I
new
think
people?
that was a conflict for that character.
Yeah. Or do you think it's because of his job as the Watcher, and if this didn't go as planned, if he didn't watch the kids, then he's not
I
doing
think
his
it was
job?
both, and I think he had a conflict sort of going on. Like, the way he read to me, I think he had a conflict going on within himself. He was making friends with these kids, and he was another 12-year-old boy.
Mm-hmm.
But also, he did have all this pressure put on him as the Watcher, as the one who was supposed to lead the children and make sure everything went to plan, that, like, this was a huge responsibility.
Yeah, that's a lot. He was one of the older kids too, wasn't he? Like, one of the ones that were
He was
dead
one of
longest?
the earlier dead kids, yeah. I think he was torn between wanting to be friends and not wanting them to die, but knowing they had to die or none of them would survive.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of
Difficult for his character.
yeah. I kind of wonder how the dog became a ghoul.
Oh, one of those kids, man. I'm telling you. I think it was one of the kids.
Yeah, but like, if they're just killing the pets, like, shouldn't there have been more ghoul dogs around? Because if they have to kill the pets first, and
Yeah.
they've said that because dogs notice, then you would think there'd be more ghoul dogs around, is what I'm saying. I think maybe somebody took pity on, I think someone who knew the children,
Yeah.
maybe it was Ray, took pity on the dog.
I don't know.
Ray or Karen.
Because
And made it a ghoul rather than just, like, dispose of it.
Petey wasn't also tied on after he was turned into a ghoul. So if the dogs are free roaming and they're staying in the shade, they wouldn't be really around that much.
But you would hear them, wouldn't you?
Over all the giggling in the bedroom from the ghosts? I don't know if I'd want to hear them.
But I mean, like, you would hear dogs howling or barking or running around the streets at night.
Of that.
Right? Because at night it's dark. So if the dogs are always free roaming.
Yeah.
But there was no mention, there was no other sound of dogs, even though they'd clearly said they'd killed dogs in the past.
Yeah. That's a loophole.
That is a loophole, but I wonder if maybe, like, I mean, we're adding to this as we say it, but I wonder if maybe Karen or Ray didn't take pity.
Yeah.
And maybe they were the one that did away with the dog and made the dog a ghoul, just so the dog would still be around once the other two children were ghouls.
Maybe. And maybe that would be more convincing to the kids. You know, stay, be one of us. You can be with Petey now too.
Also, if they eat, is it just that they drain the blood? Like, this is the thing. I think the idea was they also eat dead bodies because she had that dream of eating dead bodies.
Yeah, because that's where the dream comes in. But
and they talk about needing fresh blood.
But they don't mention the needing of fresh meat. They only mention the needing
of eating corpses, like dead flesh. So I wonder maybe if there's only some adults in the town. Like, just enough adults to keep things running. And it's mostly children. Because there is a thing with ghouls stealing children.
Yeah.
So it might be mostly a community of children with very few adults around for supervision. And I think the rest of the adults are just, like, killed and eaten.
Oh, maybe. Because you don't hear much about the other adults.
No, and there was just enough to be invited to somebody's house for a backyard party.
Yeah.
You know there's adults around, like there's Mr. Compton Dawes. But yeah, I don't think there's maybe that many adults.
No, they don't focus on that, but it's a kid's book. And adults are boring to get, so.
How do we feel about the character portrayal?
I think it was well done for the target audience. Like, you kind of had the sibling roles, because, like, the older child usually takes care of the younger child, and
the younger child tends to be seen as, like, kind of, especially from an older child's point of view. The older child is always more mature.
Yeah.
And the younger child is always whinier and takes more patience.
Yeah, and Josh had that characteristic. And Amanda was told to kind of knock it off anytime she mentioned that there was kids in the house and she was seeing kids in the house. Like, they didn't sum it up to her being immature. Well, they kind of threw that at her, but it didn't seem to be her character. Like, they weren't saying, you know, you're always like this, you need to stop, it's time to grow up. It's just like, why are you
just sort of like, why are you saying this all of a sudden? Like, you know, don't make this hard on us, you don't normally act this way.
Yeah, we expect that from Josh, but we do not expect that from Amanda.
Yeah.
That's the overview.
That's the vibe you got.
Yeah.
They were very competent characters. They quickly picked up on different cues. They followed their gut, and there was follow-through and change because of that. So in terms of, like, representing really good child characters, they were really good, solid characters. Like,
they were,
despite, like, you know, weaknesses or slight character flaws, they were overall, they were believable. And like I said, they were shown as the victors, and it's, like, a good portrayal, I think, for kids.
The Amanda and Josh won out in the end. The parents were, like, completely on board with the town being a little off after they were captured and tied up and brought to the amphitheater, and
where everybody turned into, like, weird creatures.
They kind of got on the ball then. But like, that's the thing though.
It's also total child, like, fantasy, you know, saving the parents because the parents don't believe you.
Right? Yeah. So I think that was well done. Mr. Dawes' character, like, he was kind of the source of trust. Misplaced trust. Just
because an adult seems helpful and wonderful and has been good to you in the past doesn't necessarily mean that adult is trustworthy.
Yeah, he's not going to have the child's best interest in mind, like...
necessarily. Which is kind of a sad, weird, hard lesson. Yeah. It's also a little glossed over, like, it doesn't get too deep into that as a lesson, but it's definitely there because they put so much trust in him, and they go back to the cemetery with him to because they think he's going to help them rescue their parents. And it turns out that he's just like trying to make sure they're there to become ghouls
as well.
Yeah.
Now, like the father in this too, he was described of always tucking his shirt into his pants because he was a little overweight. But I think he was gullible too. Like, excuse me. Coming from where we come from, we know our family. Like, I know my aunts and uncles, I know my cousins, I know my second cousins. How could you not know you have an uncle, a wealthy uncle, who's leaving you a house?
But, like, scams like this run all the time, though, right?
But how can you be an
classic
adult?
Ponzi scam.
But how can you be an adult and fall for that still? Like...
Also plausible deniability, but, like, you could have a relative you don't know about, I suppose. Like, we're taught more about that, I guess, now, especially with the internet, than I think you would have been when you were first reading this as a kid.
Maybe he was so blinded by having a larger house and more space to kind of
have his family.
Yeah, that he was completely blindsided when it came to this uncle that he had knew nothing about.
And he didn't agree to anything with the house either until after he had confirmed it. Yeah. Like, he was excited to hear about it, but he did go through the process of confirming that, you know, this was a legit property, it was actually his. Like, this was a very involved setup scheme.
Yeah.
He went and viewed the house ahead of time to decide if they were even going to keep it. You know?
So he did do
due diligence.
In some sort. I don't understand how some people become adults. Oh my goodness. But I have a note here too saying it was his great uncle. So I take it back because I don't know all of my great aunts and uncles. But
so you're rescinding. You're rescinding your earlier
I'm rescinding
view.
back a little bit. But I do know a good portion of them.
So overall, for how the story was structured, how do you feel about the structure?
I think it's laid out well. Like, there's climatic points where the dog was running around, and the false starts, like you said, where it was kind of something was happening, but it wasn't really getting into what was happening. There was a solid basis of lore to kind of build the story on.
Yeah, it was fairly well written. My biggest issue was just the fact that it was Mr. Da at the end. Yeah. Like, honestly, I'd have believed the full thing if this was a different person showing the house. Because maybe, like, the entire town didn't necessarily have to be at the amphitheater, or maybe one or two people got away. But we knew Mr. Da had died.
Maybe he couldn't actually die and, like, stay dead because he was one of the originals.
But Ray never came back.
But Ray wasn't one of the originals. Like, maybe Mr. Da actually died because of the gas attack and because of the sudden tragicness of that. Yes, he could wilt, but he come back up.
Maybe, but it never says that. It never explains that.
No.
We're trying to fill plot holes, is what we're doing here.
We're trying to be creative.
But I would have found it much more believable and liked it better if it had been a person she didn't speculate was Mr. Dawes. If it was somebody totally different showing the house. Yeah. That would have done it for me. How do we think this stacks up compared to what we remember?
Well, I didn't read this one as a child. This is one that I did not read. I know I did not read it.
You know you did not read it.
I know I did not read that story before. No.
I definitely did read this as a kid. It was one of the first few I read. It wasn't the first one I read, because we all know what the first one I read was. But I definitely do, like, I remembered little bits of it as I was reading it, but I didn't remember it very solid.
Oh, okay.
I didn't really remember that they were ghouls until, like, after, like, when they were starting to hunt around the graveyard. Then I started to remember, oh, right, with the flesh and everything. Because at first I was thinking they were ghosts. And it's definitely set up to make you think they are at first.
Well, I couldn't even remember this story from the TV series.
I don't know if they did this one in the TV show or not, because I didn't see as much of the show.
Because I've seen a lot of the TV show, but I couldn't remember this story at all. Like, as I was reading, I'm like, okay, so what's going on with this character, and why can't they find the dog? Like, there was nothing kind of triggering in my mind as, you've read this story before. or you've heard this story before.
Yeah. Well, I at least got the feeling of that.
Okay.
But in terms of like going back and rereading it as I'm older, it was enjoyable. It was a decent read. It was fairly well done.
Oh yeah.
I think as a kid's book, there's a lot of things you will overlook as a child that you may not overlook as an adult. So in terms of that, it doesn't hold up as well, but it's still a pretty solid, fun, quick read.
Yeah.
Like this literally took like, including my taking notes, it took me an hour and a half to get through this book.
And it
like,
took me
was
about
really
the same.
quick. Yeah.
Yeah, and I took less notes, but I had a few interruptions. So
From pets.
they're lucky they're cute. That's all I can say. But yeah, it was a good read and it was a good story. Like, I like to be entertained, and this is not a story that's been beaten to death. This is kind of something that has fresh ideas.
Yeah. It takes, it does its research.
Mhm.
It takes a creature that most people are familiar with, or it would be introducing you to that type of creature as a kid.
Yeah.
And it does a twist on it,
Mm-hmm.
which, like I said, I don't know how often that twist has been done,
Mm-hmm.
but I personally haven't seen it before,
No.
where they behave like actual spirits.
No. So that's different.
Yeah, so overall, this was a good read. We'd recommend it.
Yep.
Next time in the book club, what are we doing?
We're staying out of the basement.
We're staying out of the basement.
Don't have to tell me twice.
And that one will be for June, or no, we're already in July. So that will be for August 15th.
Yep.
We'll be staying at the basement. So for our viewers that want to participate
Yes.
in the book club, we want to hear what your favorite moment was from this story.
Mm-hmm.
We want to hear what you thought about the whole ghoul/spirit aspect. And what else do we want to hear about?
If they think it could happen in today's culture, like we live in a more of a electronic world now than when this was written.
Less low tech.
Yeah. So, like, when Josh went missing, do you think he'd be missing for long, or would Amanda or Mom pick up the cell phone and be like, "Where are you at?"
Yeah, or even have the tracker.
Right.
Like the Find My Phone feature.
Right. And when you bring technology in, how do you think
Well,
that would
then
change
dogs are chipped.
Right. And how do you think this would change the story?
Listen, I have a friend whose cat wears a GPS tag on their collar, so because just in case the cat gets out. So I mean,
My cat's always at my neighbors anyway.
but I mean, well, it's different. We're in a big city.
Yeah.
But still, like, you know, you have a good point there. Yeah.
So how do you think that would change the story?
I mean, would he? I mean, with the advancement of technology and more ways to research, the original claim that he got the house than before, would it be as believable?
And flash photography, would she be trying to take pictures to get those little orbs in the room that all the ghost hunters do these days? Like, there's so many different avenues that you can go that this book just completely didn't touch on because it wasn't popular for the time.
Well, and also cell phones weren't a thing everybody had in the early 90s. I mean, they've been around since the 80s, but they were these giant, like, things, and they were expensive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really good points. And, like, now that there's internet and accessibility...
All you have to do is Google that address, and you can kind of figure out, well,
you could find out how many different people own the house. There'd have to be public records of it in a way that wouldn't necessarily be at that time. So how would you change it? That's a good one. How would you change it for, like, now to make it more believable? I'd love to hear that if you guys had any thoughts on it.
oh yeah.
And if you have any questions you want to ask us, we do have Twitter set up for this. What we are planning to do is every once in a while, we're not sure how often, we are going to do an episode that's just viewer question comments. And it's going to be called Questions with the Ghost Next Door. And it's going to be hashtagged QA Ghost Next Door, I think, or Ghost Next Door on Twitter.
I think so.
Yeah, I'll put it up definitively exactly what's going to be on the screen here now, so there's no questions about it. And you can reach us, either one of us or both of us on Twitter.
Yeah, and Mandy will have our Twitter handles there, so you can ask either of us a question.
And your Twitter handle is?
Miss_J_Will. I remembered.
And I'm at a glitter macaroon with 1 T and 2 U's.
Yeah, so we'll have all that in the notes, and you can fire us off a question, and we'll try to answer it or at least be entertaining.
Yeah,
while we try.
And if you guys have any interesting thoughts, we might even retweet them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just interact with us. We're looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
And until next time, reader beware.
You're in for a scare.